Good afternoon. Welcome to this lecture on circadian rhythm and health. My name is Dr. Femke Rutters and I work as an assistant professor at the Department of Epidemiology and Data Science at the Amsterdam University Medical Center. Just to give you a short introduction, what is circadian rhythm? Well, it's the rhythm that enables us to live in this 24-hour cycle that we have, and it differs between the behavioral, endocrine, and metabolic processes that happen during the day. So for example, you sleep during the night and you are awake during the day. And for example, at 6, there's a sharp rise in blood pressure to keep you and to help you awake. So the circadian rhythm is important and it's facilitated by the light from outside. So the light outside hits your retina and then it gives a signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is a small center in the brain, which regulates this 24-hour cycle in your body. And for example, when you're awake, it sends serotonin in your body to facilitate all kinds of processes. And what kind of processes becomes obvious when this circadian rhythm is disturbed. For example, with a jet lag. But in this lecture, I will focus on a specific part of health because it's only 15 minutes and it will focus on metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. A short introduction again. So what is the metabolic syndrome? It's not a disease. It's a kind of cluster of risk factors for disease. So for example, when you have visceral obesity, insulin resistant, hypertension, high triglycerides, and low HDL cholesterol, if you have 3 or more of these factors, you have the metabolic syndrome. And when you have that syndrome, you have a high risk of developing cardiometabolic problems such as heart disease or diabetes. And diabetes is, of course, the process in which your body becomes insulin resistant. So you have too high levels of glucose in your blood, which gives all kinds of problems such as hypos, but also in the long run, you can lose your eyesight due to these high levels of glucose in your body. So what is disrupting your circadian rhythm? Well, there's of course on the right depicted the shift work. So people working at night and sleeping during the day. But there's also the disturbance due to a jet lag. So you fly from Europe to the US when it's again possible after COVID, or from Europe to Japan and you have a jet lag because the time at which you normally sleep, you're awake and vice versa. But today I also want to focus on a very specific type of circadian misalignment called social jet lag, because this is a type of jet lag which is highly prevalent in our society, much more prevalent than people doing shift work, which is already 1 in 10, or people experiencing jet lags, which is about the same number. This is present in about half of the people, half of the adults. But what is a social jet lag? I can hear you ask. Well, just let me give an introduction. The definition is the discrepancy between your sleep timing during the week and your sleep timing during weekends or days off. For example, this is my rhythm. This is before kids. So excuse me if I go way back, but I used to go to bed at 11 and wake up at 7 because my boss wants me in the office at 8. And then the midpoint of sleep is 3. But in the weekends, I let loose and start sleeping at 12 and I wake up at 10. And the midpoint of sleep is 5. But this means that there is a difference between these midpoints of about 2 hours, which means that every week on Sunday night, I have to shift back to the rhythm of the week from the weekend. And this is a social jet lag. Now I can hear you say, okay, big deal. I sleep a little bit irregular. Is there a relationship with type 2 diabetes? Well, part of my research line is to examine the association between social jet lag and a metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. The research up till now is predominantly epidemiological, which means that in big groups, we look at this association. There's not that much experimental work, but I'll get back to that later. So in 2017, together with my PhD student, Anitra, we looked in the New Horn study at this association. And it is about 2,500 people from the general population that filled out several questionnaires, but also had several physical measurements, for example, blood pressure, lipid levels, and also glucose and HbA1c levels to measure the metabolic syndrome as well as type 2 diabetes. And we did several analyses using Poisson and linear regression to assess this association between a social jet lag and diabetes outcome. And we corrected for all kinds of factors, because you can imagine that if you have an irregular lifestyle regarding your sleeping, you might have also other factors that might influence this, like age, sex, education, maybe you're a smoker or not, physical activity, your weight, as well as your sleeping patterns. And we stratified for job because that was important based on the data. So what we saw is the following, is that when you look at, for example, diabetes, we saw that people who have a jet lag of more than 2 hours have a 1.8 higher chance of having diabetes compared to those who don't have a social jet lag. It's about a 2 times higher chance of having diabetes when you are this irregular sleeper. This was especially true in younger people, and I mean younger is younger than 61 in this cohort, while this relationship was not present in people who are older, which probably has to do with people being retired at that age in the Netherlands when we did this research. So this is one study, but in the meantime, there has been quite some other studies, epidemiological studies out there, and we wanted to see if we can group all that data. So we did a meta-analysis, and what that is, just a quick overview, is you have this systematic question. In this case, is there an association between social jet lag and the metabolic syndrome and diabetes? And then you develop a search strategy in which you kind of do this net through the literature, and you kind of drag out anything that has to do with those keywords. And then based on inclusion and exclusion criteria, you filter out the articles that are relevant. And by doing this, you have you capture the whole literature instead of just random searching for the keywords in PubMed, for example. So what we ended up with is a significant amount of papers, so that we could kind of pick all the data from these individual papers and combine them to see what is the status of the data up till now. So this is a schematic review of what we did. So in the upper part, you see that we identified about 10,000 papers. Of course, because we did multiple databases, we had the duplicates removed. And then we screened about 5,000 papers to see which really, based on abstract and title, focus on our research question. Then we ended up with 133 papers left. But then when we started reading the full papers, there were still a large bunch that weren't really focusing on the topic, or they had the wrong outcome, or we had even some duplicates. We found one paper through the reference screening, but we ended up with 64 or 46 papers in the review. And just to give you some of the outcomes, as you can see in this forest plot, is that, for example, for BMI, we see that people with a social jet lag, so of 2 or more hours, have a higher BMI of 0.3 compared to those without. When you push all these studies together and you see there's about 20, you see that there's a significant effect on BMI in the observational epidemiological work. Same holds for HbA1c. So for diabetes level, one of the diabetes measures, you see a 0.4 higher HbA1c in people with social jet lag compared to those without. So now we know that, at least from the observational work, there seems to be an associations. And how would this work? So one idea is that the discrepancy between the sleep timing is also stressful for your body, and this induces higher levels of, for example, cortisol, which is also regulated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which then down the line increases your body to make higher levels of cortisol, and which then influences, for example, your insulin sensitivity and also your fat storage in your visceral fat. So for now, we will leave you with this message that it's really important to have a regular sleep timing, at at least from your circadian rhythm point of view, and that maybe a practical solution to start looking at your week and your weekend sleep timing and make it regular as the picture depicts. There's no experimental work on that yet, but we feel strongly that from this work, there's no harm in going to bed at the same time, and it might even benefit you. So for now, I will leave you with this conclusion that social jet lag is associated with an increased risk of the metabolic syndrome and diabetes. And if you have any questions or suggestions, please email me at the email address that's below. Thank you very much.